Once again, I'm Shel Culp. I think you guys all remember me from this morning. And I have with me Kathleen Monahan, who is the director of the Illinois Framework, state of Illinois. And both of us, or both states, California and Illinois, were awardees of sizable grants from the Administration for Children and Families back in November a year ago.
October.
Right, October, November a year ago. So we were given grants to plan for interoperability. So we want to talk to you a little bit about what we did, what each state did with those grants, and then maybe a little bit about how that relates to open data. So I'll go first, and then Kathleen, who has no slides. Oh, but she can do a rain dance. Kathleen will talk a little bit about her fabulous, fabulous book for Interoperability Handbook, which I think was very pretty. Did you bring copies?
It was just tweeted. No, it's interactive. It's online. There's no paper.
That's so cool. So I'll go first and get us started here. So everybody that got a book from the California Healthcare Foundation, Beyond Transparency, has this quote in the book. And the quote, I'm not going to read through the quote, I'll let you read it, is from Michael Flowers, and a central figure in the open data ecosphere. But the thing that really struck me about this quote is that everything is incremental. And then the other thing that struck me about this quote is that we're talking about open data, and he's talking about big data, but he's talking about big data in the open data book. So how are those two things related? So that's the tie to this particular quote. And then I think everybody is, knows or maybe needs to be reminded that tomorrow is the Big Data Conference, and we kick off our session tomorrow at the keynote for the Big Data Conference upstairs on the 3rd floor. It's a little bit of a circuitous path, but we'll get you there. And so this notion of big data, open data, and the incremental nature of how to make progress in either of those spaces is kind of what I want to talk about a little bit. So incremental indeed. My goodness, we've just been taking little baby steps, and hopefully they are making some progress along the route. But when Administration for Children and Families released their grant opportunity, it became immediately, and it was a late in the game release of the grant opportunity. So they released it in July. We had until August to apply, and then the grants were out in September, and we had 1 year to complete everything. So it was just really, really fast, kind of like Affordable Care Act, but not as bad. So what were we going to do with some money if we were going to be awarded that? And so in thinking about the notion of incremental, or not incremental, but in thinking about the notion of interoperability and affordable care, I was reminded and struck by the fact that we have to comply with the Medicaid Information Technology Architecture, which is MITA, if we are taking Medicaid money. And we're hearing some evidence across the country that states that are not in compliance are having to pay back money. So this makes it a bit more urgent for us to be prepared to comply with the Medicaid Information Technology Architecture and to prepare for systems interoperability. Well, what in the heck does that mean? I mean, we just really had, philosophically, we know what interoperability is about, but can we do it? Are we prepared? We didn't think so. So we were looking at opportunities that we would be able to use the grant money to prepare ourselves with. And, as it turns out for California, we didn't necessarily start at the beginning, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Illinois did start at the beginning, so we got to, we get to piggyback onto them, and then we've already taken the next step beyond them, so they get to piggyback off of us a little bit. So it all works out. So we thought we would use some grant money to gauge and build awareness for sharing data, and that's a lot of what's been going on in this room today, and will go on in this room and continue to go on tomorrow, is building and gauging awareness. What do people know about sharing data or sharing systems in the world of interoperability? Because it's not just about sharing data, it's also about sharing systems and about sharing processes and possibly other things. What do people know? What do they need to know, to move forward with that and to help us move forward with that? And then how does all of that relate to the triple aim for affordable health care? So that's better care for individuals, lower cost, and better health for populations, if you haven't heard that about 15 times today, right? So all of that boils down to, well, gee, if we're going to share things, anything, we need a way to do that that facilitates sharing in an accepted manner. So we all agree how it's going to be shared. If something gets changed that we shared, how do the rest of us who have already shared it know that it got changed? How do we control for that? And all of that boiled down to governance. So our grant was focused on governance. What do we need to put in place in the state of California to be able to share systems? Because that's what we were looking at for interoperability. So what we did was held 2 symposia, very much like this one. I mean, very much like this one. So getting people in a room, trying to gauge and understand what they knew about governance, what they knew about interoperability, what kinds of holes did we have in that understanding, what were we going to have to do later to fill in blanks, who were the champions out there that we were going to be able to count on later to help us advance the notion of interoperability. And then probably most importantly for the grant work, we formed some work groups. And you should pay attention here because later tomorrow you might be asked to participate in a work group. But the work groups actually did a lot of the heavy lifting in helping us understand what needed to happen in time frames associated with near, middle time frame, and then longer term. We also produced an interoperability plan for the state of California and a roadmap. And then the governance model itself got produced. And there were various and sundry other pieces of that. We produced symposia, and we produced some videos that went along with that symposia, and an implementation plan, and some other things. The things that I listed on this slide are the things that Administration for Children and Families were sort of gauging our performance on. So that's why you see those things there. So this is a bit of an eye chart. I apologize, but that is actually the output of the work groups that produced the work. So we had actually 4 work groups: a governance work group along the top left there, and then below that is the legal and confidentiality work group, the information technology work group, and the organizational change management work group. And then that last line on the bottom of the page is the synthesis or the things that sort of had ties to all of the groups or were factors that seemed to show up in a lot of the groups, and so we just called that synthesis. It wasn't actually a work group by itself. But the other way to look at these work groups is to recognize that these formed the major categories of important ideas that coalesced out of our symposia, out of our 2 symposia. So the big ticket items are the big things that we needed to pay attention to related to governance, legal and confidentiality, information technology, and organizational change management. So from those work groups, we were able to come up with all of these bulleted points of things that have to happen somewhere along the line. And we were able to organize them into these time periods. So in 0 to 6 months, we could do that first column on the left. And in 6 to 24 months, we thought we might be able to do that middle column. And then beyond 2 years, we thought we might be looking at that last column on the right. So that's a lot of little bullets and a lot of opportunity for progress. So how have we been doing? So I'm going to take each work group and kind of give you an idea of how we've been doing here. And there's our governance one. So the red thing there, establish major elements of a governance model, executive governance council, and then begin to gather and draft materials. That's progress we have already made in the governance space. Now we haven't, we've made that progress. We haven't necessarily, finalized everything, but that's a lot of progress that we've made, and it hasn't even been 6 months. So I think that's a good thing. In the area of legal and confidentiality, we've completed and compiled a survey on barriers to info sharing and analysis. I think I'm looking at our legal and confidentiality chair over there, and he's nodding his head, so that's a good thing. I think you guys still have to work on your finalizing the privacy and confidentiality framework, and in the 6 to 24 month space. So we're not necessarily staying only in the 6 month space. To the extent that we are making progress in the other time periods, that's a good thing too. So I'm noting that as well. I believe that the group has categorized issues in buckets for action. And so that kind of illustrates the nonlinear approach to this kind of work that can go on. A lot of work in the information technology area, and that's our architect down there and his team has been just pushing relentlessly to get all of this stuff done. And I don't even know if I captured all of it. I was just kind of thinking off the top of my head. Well, I know that they've done some education and outreach, and they continue to do all of that. And I know that they're looking for synergies across enterprise architecture and planning the integration approach. And I know they're trying to influence the new Child Welfare Services new system build. I know they're enlisting sponsors, so I think those were, essentially low-hanging fruit. There's probably more on that list that I don't know about because, well, I don't have to know everything all the time. But in the 6 to 24 month space, I know that they've been assessing active projects and reviewing plans against that proposed governance process that we put up, and I know that they've been adjusting and integrating enterprise architectures as they can across projects that are proposed. So that's a huge amount of progress made in the IT space. And in the organizational change management space, which was the committee that I sort of theoretically chaired. Really, Rick chaired it, but I sort of theoretically chaired that. We haven't been, because it was me, we haven't been making so much progress. But we have identified some key stakeholders and have begun to assess their stance towards interoperability, and we have begun to cultivate some champions, many of which I think are sitting in this room today. But we still have a lot of work to do. In the synthesis category, we continue. I mean, you're here today partially because we're continuing to champion this culture change towards sharing and communication and understanding open data. But you'll notice that there's nothing else that's really highlighted in that space. So, we have a ton of work to do still. So how does that fit with open data? And how it fits first and foremost is that this is open data is part of the lessons learned from interoperability, or how we look at data is probably a more accurate notion here. And so this symposium is kind of a follow-on of the interoperability work to kind of keep things in front of you, to keep you thinking about how important this is. And it's part of our roadmap. So you saw some open data, or you saw some data things in the roadmap boxes that I just showed you around information technology and organizational change management. And then ultimately, we have to be comfortable with sharing, which is the core of open data, if we're going to do interoperability. I can't emphasize that enough. We have to get comfortable with this notion of sharing around, and it's the same notion for open data. We have to get comfortable with that, and that's a big lift. So what's still needed here? Obviously, there's a bunch of bullets on that roadmap slide that need to turn red or green. I suppose I could color them green, but we have to start and get those things done. But we also have to be building a strategic vision for data in the Health and Human Services Agency. So we are actually doing that. It didn't show up on our roadmap, but it is something that has come up here recently, and we are making some progress in that space. You know, we have to do that while we're understanding the pragmatic actions of a data inventory, the metadata needs, and some standards. So these are all conversations that have recently gotten started and are continuing, and we're making good progress, I think. We need to understand the risk associated with open data in certain aspects. And this is a conversation that I've had with a couple of people today during the break times, that we talk about open data, and then I hear a lot of people talking about, well, what if somebody's confidential data leaks out? And my first thought is, well, that's not open data, is it? By definition, that's not open data. Open data is something that, have we heard a definition of open data today? Okay, so you guys know, it's something that's freely shareable, it's not confidential. I mean, it's public by definition. But yet there's still a risk. What if somebody's personal or personally identifying information kind of got mixed up with that open data? So there's some risk there, and I don't want to call that risk out as a big roadblock or even a small roadblock. I think it's just something that we need to understand and address, and be able to articulate what we're doing to guard against that. Probably the biggest lift on this is culture shift. And you've heard me say it, I don't know, 5 times during this 15 minutes. But we have to shift our culture to sharing, and we have to shift our culture to collaboration and communication. And that's not something that government typically does. Now, it seems kind of counterintuitive because, of course, we're collaborating within our spaces, but we don't necessarily collaborate with that next silo next to us on either side or in front or behind. So we have to think about shifting our culture, and not just think about it, we have to actually do it. Now, that's the heaviest lift because I think that's the longest road. I won't call it the long pole in the tent because I'm not real sure what that means. But it's going to take a long time for that to happen, and it's going to take concerted effort for everybody to continue to do that over many years before that culture shifts completely and sticks. And I put culture shift before something to measure and ways to measure it because in order to do that last bullet, you have to have that culture shift, I think. So measuring things, I mean, you'd think, we got all this data in government, you'd think that we'd be good at measuring. But what we're actually measuring, what we're really good at measuring is outputs, not outcomes. So I can tell you unflinchingly what we did. I just can't tell you how we're doing. And that's kind of a culture shift to get people to think about collecting data to measure outcomes. Well, first think about what are the outcomes that we want to measure. So that's what's still needed from California. Oops, that's not the next one. I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen and do my rain dance.
What did that next one? Oh, we'll leave that up there while I'm talking since I don't have slides. I apologize. My name is Kathleen Monahan. I'm the director of the Illinois Framework, which is an interoperability initiative in the state of Illinois. 7 agencies, health and human services agencies, have signed an intergovernmental agreement stating that they want to move the state towards an enterprise. And everyone in this room, I assume, knows what that means. We're trying to build a health and human services enterprise. So not only have they signed an IGA committing to do that, but they are financially committed as well. In that regard, Illinois is light years ahead of many states. We're thinking about it. We have this IGA. The agencies are committed. And in many other ways, we're exactly the same as any other state. And we have incremental changes that we have to accomplish the same as everyone else. It is a challenge. We continue to bring people to the table to have the discussions, just like what we're having in this room today, the discussions that I sort of tell people that my job is to force people to talk about things they don't want to talk about and discuss the things that they've been putting off for years. And the framework's job is to convene people and have those discussions. We also received a State Systems Integration and Interoperability grant from the Administration for Children and Families. Ours was focused on creating a roadmap for governance across systems. So an interoperability project like the Illinois Framework could use this roadmap to create a governance structure, or a county could if they're trying to build a system across that many different agencies are trying to work together for. I think that Rachel tweeted a link to our governance handbook that's on the Illinois Framework website. I encourage you all to look at it. Our website is easy, illinoisframework.org. There's an interactive PDF that we're very proud of. Many people in this room contributed to that project, including Stewards of Change, Shell Culp, Paul Wormley. There's a lot of strategic thinking that went into this governance handbook. A year ago, nothing like this existed, and so I encourage any of you that are thinking about how to work through some of these issues to take a look at our handbook. We came up with something that we call 6 attributes of good governance. And one of the most important ones of those attributes is that we require our agency directors to actually attend our executive steering committee meetings. They rarely send a designee. That means that once they get over their kind of toe-tapping, what are we doing here, anger in the first meeting, they start working together and they understand why they are at the table rather than their chief of staff or their deputy director. We are just now beginning in Illinois to sort of move into our second phase of the framework. We've created a governance structure, we've got the agreement in place, we've got a few small projects going, but now we're starting to bring together the privacy, security, and confidentiality officers of each of these 7 agencies. We're starting to have discussions about how can we begin to share the appropriate data with the appropriate people, and how can we in Illinois start to create something like a master person index where we agree to share our information across agencies. We have to start having conversations about who owns the data. Do we use Ivan Handler's master client index? Is it going to work for all 7 agencies? Master person? Okay, sorry. And we have such a variety of agencies that are part of the framework. You heard from Stefan Kanye earlier today. He's sort of the open data thought leader in Illinois. We had an Open Data Fest in Illinois. So he's with the Illinois Department of Public Health. At the other end of the spectrum, we have our Child Welfare Agency, which of course is afraid to share any information. And then we have our Medicaid agency, which has a massive enterprise data warehouse, and they don't give reports to anybody about anything. So our job is to bring everyone together and start talking about it. We are doing this incrementally, just like Shell said. It is an uphill battle every day, but we're moving along a path towards interoperability. And I really feel like this open data effort that's basically worldwide at this point is just going to sort of become part of the water. It's starting to seep into everyone's sort of knowledge base. Hey, if they're doing that in London, why can't we do that here? And so that's just going to sort of lift all boats, I think, when we have these recalcitrant agencies or these difficult issues where people are fighting and digging in their heels. We have examples that we can use from symposiums like this where we can demonstrate, hey, you know, sharing your data isn't such a big deal. So I encourage you to look at our governance handbook. We're really proud of it, illinoisframework.org. And I I guess that's it. Shell and I are available for questions now.
Great talks, both of you. Have you been able to use any combined data sets in an interesting way in Illinois to inspire people about what might be possible? So in advance of fully integrating the systems, be able to do some interesting analysis, perhaps visualization?
I would say we're on the verge of that. We are entering phase 2, I would say, of the framework. We've done a scan of, there's 60+ programs within those 7 agencies that are part of the framework, and we've basically taken a look at all of them. We are most likely going to do a pilot with Children and Family Services, and we're going to take that, something that we hope to create fairly quickly, demonstrate to the executives how useful that information is, and then quickly launch a much broader sort of a performance indicator, executive level analysis project. We're also planning to train state staff in how to use some of the data too. So we've got a lot of levels going with that plan.
You didn't ask California, Cheryl. But is Emily still here? Is Emily still here? She just left. She stepped out. So you know about Emily's work, but in the event that other people don't know about Emily's work, something that it does for a point in time, or for actually 5 years point in time, illustrates the power of combining the birth cohort data with child welfare services case management data, and essentially shows 11 indicators of a child's likelihood of entering the child welfare system within the first 5 years of life. And that is really very powerful information. If governments had that on a real-time basis, and I mentioned that was point in time, so it's only for 5 years, but those 11 indicators on a real-time basis could inform school administrators and teachers and social workers and all sorts of people that touch that child's life that that child is at risk, and we can even tell you on a relative scale how much at risk that child is. So what would you do differently to deliver services to that child? It's very powerful work that Emily and Barbara Nidell did to illustrate just exactly what you're talking about. Yes? You need a microphone? I can hear you. I can hear you just fine.
One other thing I was wondering about is, I know in the California example, there's the proof of concept aspect to it in terms of prescribing of psychotropic drugs. And
I forgot to mention that, didn't I?
Yeah, you forgot to mention that in this paper I have over there. But I was wondering if, I don't know, Kathleen, if you're familiar with that, and if Illinois also looked at a more real-time implication, of interoperability, and if you're familiar with that.
I know exactly what you mean. I am very familiar with that, the California proof of concept. In Illinois, we aren't doing anything specifically like that, but we have had a recent very high-profile child death in Illinois, and some really kind of weird, sad turnover within that agency. We had a fantastic director who was blowing up silos all over the place, and he recently died. And so the agency has had a lot of turmoil, and so Framework was asked to come in and quickly do something, help us track our children. And so we're going to be using, I think, the Child Welfare Agency as our proof of concept. We're going to create management analytics for them, but we're also going to create person-centric data analysis, let's call it, so that they can start tracking their kids better. And so because of the need there, it sort of bubbled up to be our proof of concept. In a year, I hope to have a lot more to say about it. It's really just starting right now.